Now, as we create this, we'll be selecting this area and extruding it down using Y to forward and Z as 0 in order to snap on the Z-axis, in order to make it flattened as the head is going down, and then adjusting it using the G key, and then rotating it using the R key. R to rotate it, and Control R to add more cuts in the geometry. Then rotate this using G, X, and place it over the top of the head area. And G, X. Now Control click this point to select them all and then move them using GX. Now in this way you'll get a subdivided geometry. Now you can use something else or combine all these body parts and then extract geometry out of it. And we're making sure while extruding this that things look subdivided in order to bridge them with faces. But why we didn't use the traditional sculpting tools to create the cloth? Because for a beginner perspective it tends to become a little more harder, and I want to show you that even with basic modeling skills the cloth could be made. You need to spend some time. I have spent somewhere around to make this base cloth mesh around 47 minutes. It'll take about an hour, but you'd be happy with the geometry and you'd be able to control it. Now you can join all the geometry and using the masking tool mask out the structure of the cloth and then extract it as geometry, and then can refine it from there. But everyone who owns a computer doesn't has a high-end computer. Some people use low-end computers, so for them this would be beneficial, because if you were to combine all the geometries together, it will result into a more larger geometry. Even though Blender can handle it, but some hardware limitations, it might be really complicated. But as I have a really low-end laptop, like from 2016. It has an Radeon R5 graphics and has not even an CPU but an APU of A9 7th generation processor, which has a 10 to max 15 watt TDP. So you can see that with how many constraints I'm making this. And in order to show you I'm making it with this low-end system, because in order to give you an outlook that yes, even if you have an old setup, you doesn't have to just go in and upgrade. If you can, it is okay. But if you can't and you just want to try to understand the world of 3D by creating sculpts and want to learn sculpting, you need to know that you might not need a high-end computer. It might be a bit slower, but it not get in your way of working in the beginning. And later on, if you get into high poly sculpting really, then you buy a new computer or either upgrade your graphics card. Otherwise, with even integrated graphics from 2016, with very low-end hardware, you can create these things, and that is the point of showing this. And you would not believe that how Blender can handle things. This laptop with barely 15 watt TDP can handle up to 50 million polygons. And with this Sculpt, after the retopology and all the things, I've used the Sculpt, the sculpted model, and created a scene which ended up like 5 million polygons, and I've rendered the animation. And yes, it was an animation. It was a 700 frames of animation, and 700 photos have to be rendered out with this kind of setup. It took like 16 hours to do so. Not even 4K or in full HD, but it's doable. And that is all to show you that yes, Blender had came a long way. It can handle really high and dense geometry without crashing. A better idea I can give you is to just use an SSD. If you have a hard disk, it would be much slower. So the only thing you can upgrade with to improvise your speed is an SSD. With an old system, you would still be able to have really good speed and really amount of geometry. Like 50 million polygons is quite a lot for being able to do Sculpt. And I'm saying this, I haven't even used the Vulkan backend. I was using OpenGL, the decades older graphics engine system calculation method, and Vulkan can handle like millions of polygons with no sweat, especially in the case of sculpting and sculpt mode in Blender. If you have an RTX or maybe something similar to that, that's what I have seen so far. Now think that if my system would have been able to use Vulkan with an RTX, then this can go like a lot further and a lot faster, especially on the remeshing parts and in other areas where geometry have to be counted and in the viewport also. But for this project, it is really fine. And this is to help you know that if you're a beginner, you're starting, you doesn't need to spend $200 or a $700 machine or a graphics card of $300. You can really go in with integrated graphics even from 2016 and Blender will still work. It doesn't have those high specs requirements always like how other things have. The only thing I've noticed was that in Linux 5.0 had been crashing. Until 4.5 it is working fine, but with 5.0 requirements, Mesa drivers aren't functioning well. So what is required is that you would use Windows if you're using 5.0 and install the correctified drivers for your integrated graphics. And then you would see that it is working fine. And you doesn't have to spend the money if you doesn't want to right now. And you can just spend the time to just learn about things. And then when you feel like after 6 months, 3 months or a year that you're comfortable to move further and you have learned much, your speed have improved, then you can go and buy and upgrade your hardware. And that will give you an immense amount of speed boost after that. But in the beginning, you actually do not need a lot of resources. What you can do with the limited resources is unimaginable, like I am rendering an animation without any Vulkan support in OpenGL. In Blender, with 5 million polygons with all the animations, textures, and 5 million geometry is insane in this old hardware. People even cannot think. If you were to do the same amount of work in Cinema 4D or in Houdini, it will definitely not work, because Cinema 4D stucks in the beginning. Houdini will crash. So this is to say you that Blender gives you enough amount of flexibility with the drivers of boards that you can use old hardware as new ones. You just make one choice, that if you have an old hard disk, you would use an SSD. If after using for a month or so, you see you're improvising and you want to keep going in this direction of learning and learning more, then I would recommend you to have an SSD. If you have an old hard disk, even in a laptop, it would give you at least 10 times more faster speed. Especially if you're using Windows, because Windows makes things a little too slow. Linux, in the other hand, was like blazing fast. And it's also about the how much of geometry count you have. So you have seen that how extruding till this point, making the base geometry, how we have created the geometry. And we can pull these vertices and extrude them and select and press F on the keyboard to fill in more geometry and create faces to make this base geometry of the cloth without using the sculpting tools, without have to going with and dealing with millions of polygons if you doesn't want to. And if you want to do modeling, and this is a great way to combine 3D modeling and sculpting to create clothes using the modeling techniques and to create the sculpt. We actually use the sculpt brushes. So the prop on to creating the props, you can use modeling quite a lot, and that will also help you to have lesser geometry counts and have a faster viewport performance. Because if you were to make this sculpt of cloth in sculpt mode and using the sculpting tools, then the resulting geometry would be much more higher, and that would make your viewport slower. So if you're just a beginner, you have an old hardware, what I would recommend you to is, for clothes and props, you can use the base modeling. And as you go further, you start experimenting with more sculpting, and then you can sculpt the clothes and other things. Just make sure you doesn't have to go high poly always. You start from a single geometry and can go through it. Now, if the modeling gives you headache, the traditional modeling systems, just like I'm doing here, then you can go for sculpting the cloth, joining all the meshes of all the parts of the character using Ctrl G, Shift, holding them together, and press Ctrl G to merge them and then remesh it with a higher subdivision level. And that will give you a dense geometry from which you can draw a mask and go to mask, extract, and extract the geometry you have drawn using the mask brush. But that will result you to a really high geometry count. We usually do not recommend for low-end systems to do that, sometimes it can crash if you do remesh the wrong way in a low hardware, but usually it doesn't. You need to just wait for a minute or two for the geometry to extract out. And if you have a good computer, then that is not a problem. But it's a good practice to have your clothes modeled by your hand. That'll give you some modeling experience that in difficult geometries, how to make the retopology, and this could be used as a retopology practice as well, because people know how to sculpt at some point after spending months and months. But after that, when it comes to retopology, then they start to have headache. And without retopology, you cannot know how to unwrap the mesh in the right way. Without unwrapping the mesh in the right way, you cannot know how to texture the model. And without a proper topology, without a proper UV unwrapping system, if you were to go to sell the model, or if you were to go to use the model in some other scene, with the raw sculpt, it would be really difficult to render things out. And it will be just uselessly making a lot of usage of the resources of your computer. We are now pulling the vertices, extruding them, selecting and creating faces on the bottom part. Now we use Control R to create more loop cuts and join them and keep doing this on repeat. And from the back to the front. So the back comes and goes down and merges, and also from the front. And the side vertices go around the legs and wraps up. Because this is going to be the cloth, it should take the silhouette of the body to make a feeling that the cloth is wrapping around the body with all its curvature. Now the real thing is that the animation that I've presented with this actually had 50 million polygons with the forest, the staircase that I've sculpted, and the statue of the Buddha, and the butterflies from my another project which is available online to buy. And when I've combined all those things and the particle system animations of the butterflies and then the falling leaves of the tree, it resulted into 50 million polygons. But I somehow figured out a way to reduce the polygon count to only 5 million polygons, 10 times lesser, with no compromises with the geometry, without losing the quality of the look, keeping the same quality, and reduced the textures from 4K to 2K because my inbuilt graphics card wasn't been able to handle that much, and neither my CPU was being able to in Eevee. But in terms of cycles, it could do that, but it would have taken ages, and rendering all that animation of 40 seconds nearly took 16 hours to do that in Eevee. And I didn't use cycles because cycles was giving better results, really, out of the box, even to some extent better than Eevee. But due to the higher rendering times, I considered using Eevee and to showcase that how the Eevee renders look. Now, if you have a good graphics card already, then it's going to be bread and butter case. But with Eevee, you can actually render quite a lot more in lesser time. Now, with this low-end system, what I can do with this, you can understand that what could be done with the high-quality system. But even you have a low-quality system, you can understand now that even it is possible to create good quality art and not to say that I have a low-quality system, because it's not actually tested. People usually see others using RTX or similar high quality systems and then working on it mostly. But I can say you with guarantee you can easily render 5 million polygons. And if you have a capable CPU and a good GPU, even in a laptop, you can render 50 million polygons. And I could see all those 50 million geometry in the viewport with the rendering, textures, everything turned on, multiple light sources, not one or two, many of them. With the gobo lighting and sunlight and area lights and many things. And it all worked really fine for me. And I've turned the settings quite high, the precision of the Eevee quite high. And you can understand from this that even with minimal setups, you can work quite a lot in Blender. Now, Blender gives the edge over ZBrush because with ZBrush you need to have an external renderer to render your final projects. With Blender, you doesn't have that problem. You have cycles or Eevee, either using the path tracing for realism and lighting, or Eevee for faster rendering and iterations in real-life lighting scenes. And most of the times, like 80-90%, to some extent, it's going to say that the lighting is quite the same as cycles, that you could barely notice there are differences if you set up things correctly, and it actually doesn't take quite a lot to set up, comparable to the rendering times that it gives. And it is especially great if you are creating animations or environment scenes. Now, it is not tested with environment scenes in Eevee quite a lot, and due to that part, I've created an outdoor environment scene, not an indoor scene, by the way. The forest is an outdoor scene, right? So that says quite a lot, that yes, outdoor scenes could be made. And because this is a beginner-friendly tutorial, the quality of the trees or things are not as high as you might request. But even if you have like quality assets, then it could be quite a lot. But even making these things took me months. Just for the model it took like 2 weeks, but for the animation and setup and testing things out and making sure that this big chunk of geometry would work rendering to optimize things, it took me 3-4 months extra, and also some rendering time. Due to that, it slowed down, but altogether a few more projects was going on at the same time, so for me it was a win-win situation. I've found that my system is quite capable, and I'm capable of working with a lot more geometry if I want, in upgraded systems quite a lot more. And then I'd be creating the legs So Shift A and create a new metaball object. And duplicate it pressing Shift E. Here creating the base of the leg, the bottom part of the foot, and scaling it down. Now you can see in the folders, I've created a separated folder called foot and put it all the foot parts into it. And in order to transform it to a mesh, you can convert it, searching for the operator mesh, and it will convert all the metaballs to mesh. And then create another metaball. And just like that, duplicate it, pressing Shift D. For the thumb of the foot, and then selecting all the metaball objects, duplicate them. Now this would also be converted once all the fingers are created of the foot. All the parts would be created. Press it and you can press the operator and search for mesh in the search bar and convert the metaball objects to mesh, and then sculpt on it after remeshing them. I'm sculpting with the grab brush here. As I've said, grab brush works in all geometries, and then smoothing it out using the smooth brush. And using the crease brush, you can make the shape of the thumb and cut the front part of it, and that's how you create a thumb, but we'd be adjusting it quite a lot, just like with other shapes we have done. Using the grab brush and pulling it down, and then using the draw brush, we'll be creating the bone structure, and then smoothing it out to flatten it a bit. Later we'll be joining the big part of the foot and all the toes together. Using the Z view and go to the edit mode and P to separate the object, and selected object should be separated using that operator. And using the smooth brush, smooth it out, and we have separated this part because we're going to copy it quite a few times. So we place at our desired area. Now, one thing you need to keep in mind that you need to remesh in a high quality. It doesn't want to keep things to too much close, otherwise while remeshing it will be turned into volume and both volumes merge from the thumb to the next finger. Both will just get merged together, so you need to keep some distance between them while using remesh. That's a drawback side of the remesh, but what you can do is that you can remesh in a higher resolution, and that could get fixed. You need to try with the geometry that which remeshing resolution works. To try like 2-3 times to figure this out. If you're a beginner or you're just experimenting with the things, then it is good to know while you work what is going to happen doing what. And this is the part we like about digital sculpting. We can fix some of the things on the go. I'm trying to creating the bottom marks of this, and using the grab brush, trying to pulling out some area. Now this doesn't have to be so much of perfect tendency, because due to the fact that this could be your first sculpt, so take it slowly. There's no rush. For me, it took like 3-4 hours. Basically not creating the base geometry, but refining things. But you can do it. It'll take a bit more time. If you have some background of painting, you are from a painting background, you know how to paint, so especially on characters, and you're a good character artist, maybe, or have some anatomy knowledge, then this would be fast for you. But if you don't have that knowledge, then doing this kind of practices would help you to visualize. It is better to have an official anatomy reference and have an anatomy book in order to study more as you go on. But for the beginner parts, it is okay, because all of us start from somewhere. If it makes you enthusiastic about things, curious about things, you get curious about this, then you can surely do a couple of times and then check reference images from reference books of anatomies. There are quite plenty of them out there. Some of them are free as well. So the anatomy you can learn from YouTube as well. No one in this world comes learned everything. Everyone learns things, but we learn things which are important to us. And this seems important to us because it helps us evolve as a human, to learn. And that's why you might want to learn this. It's not about saying other people who you are, but it's about knowing who you are and having some joy in the process, that yes, you have learned something valuable that maybe cannot be even measured in money. And when you learn, and then after a certain point of learning you start teaching, then you start understanding the significance of learning. That once you are a student, then you become a teacher. And a good teacher's work is to help others to grow. And it's completely okay to learn things in order to do that. To help others to grow. Now, creating these characters would help you to understand different parts of the body and its anatomy, but I would suggest you to have an anatomy book with you or some important anatomy references for different from legs, for foot, for hands, from different directions. If it is possible, then buy an anatomy statue. There are very smaller versions available in the internet or online, and you would be able to help yourself in the process while beginning. Just give a few months yourself. Then if you feel comfortable in this, then buy an anatomy statue. There are smaller hand-sized versions available. And there are also references available on internet. And both can help you while working to have a look at reference of the anatomy, because there's quite a lot of them. Those muscles and bone structures inside the body that makes it look from outside like the structure and curvatures that we usually look at. But we do not recognize, because everything is under the layer, so it is quite a layered system underneath. To understand it, it helps you better to visualize what you're creating. And also there are size and proportions of how much things should be. Here I am just eyeballing things. There is no maths included in it. I'm just trying to creating something from my mind. And if it looks correct, if it looks right, then it could be right. Because the purpose of this model is going to be used for any type of architectural visualization. It doesn't have to be a specific size. It could be a small hand-sized idol placed somewhere in the archviz scene. It could be a big size model that is placed on somewhere in the room. Or it could be just a statue that is textured in a rock material and could be outdoors for some sort of mystical outdoor forest scene. And that all is okay. You can put it anywhere where you like, where it makes a significance to the scene. So it doesn't have to have a correct size in this scenario. And if it would have a correct size in the scenario, then you would need to measure the size of the body. Definitely. But if you're creating just artwork, then it's okay in the beginning, but later on you need to measure the sizes of each proportion so they look correct, or you would be able to help yourself dimensioning things if you're creating a specific character, to have an idea that what size proportions each area of the body has. And that will help you get the exact results, or either have in one-to-one reference like a painting of what you're creating, and then do accordance to that side by side. But while using references, one point is very important. You have to have reference of the item from all four sides, front, behind, left and right, to have the right proportion. So after creating the basic shape of the leg and joining the toes and the foot, we are sculpting the merging areas of both, but they've been joined. We're smoothing the areas out using the smooth brush. We're making all the basic geometry more smoother using the smooth brush on a higher intensity of 0.7. Now we would be refining the shape, but before that it's important that it looks smooth, and doing this is necessary. And in some areas we'd be adding some extra thickness using the clay strip brush, smoothing it out. Now, disabling all the other objects in the viewport and making one thing visible at a time helps you visualize better, and you could help yourself allow more geometry in the scene if you're creating a larger size object. Especially while using the remeasure modifier for sculpting, it will result in a lot of geometry. Using dynamic topology helps into this, but it needs some knowledge to use it. It's not impossible to know about it. If you try how to use it, you could learn about that as well. And because this is going to be a beginner-friendly tutorial, beginners should know that how to use the remeasure. That'll give you a general idea of how it works. It's basically straightforward, but for someone new, it could be a little bit more time-consuming. To figure out which size actually working on. Now you can use the picker symbol in remesh panel to identify what size you're going for, and therefore you can choose the sizes you want. Now we're going to smooth out this area as well using the smooth brush. This areas as well. Now you can see as we're smoothing the areas out, this separated objects after joining looks much more like one single thing. Now I'm using the grab brush to pull out this area, because this is going to be the part where the foot meets the upper part of the leg, and the bone structures will be there, so keeping in mind grabbing things in that way. Now, this is not a standard way of making the foot, but there is actually no standard way of making the foot. You can make the photo using the modeling techniques, using a basic base mesh and then sculpting top over it, the details. But that is not much fun to do while you're beginning. So let's just grab the geometry and work in this way. And make the backbone sides and make these areas a bit more flattened, because we're going to add a circular shape of bone that is always existing in every human being in this proportion, which looks somewhat like this. Now it doesn't have to go 100% fine, because we just want the shape of the leg to have a basic structure. Now using the box cutting tool, you can cut off the top part. Box trimming the top part, and then on the bottom part adding more using the glazed brush. After cutting it, it looks like this. Using the box mask tool, we'll be selecting the top area and then inverting it. To bring it up, using the gizmo move tool and giving it a structure. This would be joined with the leg proportion we have created. I'm smoothing the areas out using the smooth brush. Now, if you have difficulty while smoothing, you can actually go for the one strength and you can make it 2. It's not usually recommended, but you can do that. And I'm using the clay strip brush for creating a bone-like shape. And then using the crease brush to make something similar to bones, and it does work. You have to do it a couple of times to get these results, and yeah, it looks like bones right now. I could definitely model the leg or the hand or any other part, but it is good to know that how to sculpt it. Sometimes just sit down, sculpting a leg, creating a reference, maybe painting a reference for yourself, and then looking at that and making it. It'll give you the help to make things faster and quicker on each part as you keep doing this every day. And smoothing the top part out to make it look much more natural. Now with high polygon meshes, with too much subdivisions, this smoothing effect will actually get lower because the mesh actually carries more geometry, and just subsiding them becomes more and more tougher. You can see that how much time it is taking, and it'll be taking more time if you have a lot of geometry, and that's why it's important to learn how to use less amount of geometry. Of course, if you would be retopologizing this, it could be getting down. You can just adjust some of the areas if you turn off the shrink wrap modifier while doing the retopology, but it's a good practice to keep it low as possible while working, so you can easily create minor changes in the mesh. And that's where the multi-resolution modifier actually shines. You want to actually divide in a quite like a less amount of polygons, and then add a multi-resolution modifier and then use it like an 100k polygon mesh, and then using multi-resolution modifier on that. Taking the help of the multi-resolution modifier, you would be able to go back into lower levels to adjust the primary form of the shape, and for minor tweaks you can go to the higher level using the multi-resolution modifier. In this case, I'm showing you how to use the remesh. Now if you are used to remesher, you can use that. Different people have different options. Some like multi-resolution, some like remesh, some people like the dynamic topology. Depends on the work you're doing, and depends on your need, and depends on what you are willing to choose to work. There's three options for everyone, and I'm masking this out using the box mask. Smoothing this area out. And pressing the Alt M, you can clear the mask. The masked area won't be affected. The unmasked area you could be working on. In some cases, this is really helpful, and in sculpting, in many cases, it would be a lot of help to create a mask to isolate one area and then working on the other, so that other areas doesn't get affected. Only your specific area that you're willing to work only gets affected. That's why the mask is really important. So after creating the leg, we're creating the back part of it. Here I'm polishing out the back of the foot, the back side of it. I'm using the flatten brush, flattening things out and then smoothing things out. And on the bottom part, I'm using the clay strip brush to add more clay. And smoothing things out with a smooth brush. On a higher geometrical level, if your model goes high poly, then you need to use the smooth brush with a higher strength, or either have to keep doing it gradually in a higher setting like 0.7 at this case for a few minutes, and then adjust the proportions using the grab brush. And smooth out the bottom part. and adjust the proportions and this backbone of the leg. And pull out some of the areas. And then smooth out this area. Add some of the muscles using the clay strip brush and smooth out to have a gradually fading look. Even though the bottom of the leg would not be visible, but it is good to maintain a structure that is close to the original part of the body, original part of the anatomy, as much as possible. Even from a distance, the details adds in to the realism of the thing, of the character that you're designing. Now I'm creating a box mask to mask out this area. Just simply dragging the cursor and releasing it using the mask tool. That will help us to modify this area or any other area without impacting the masked areas, in order to exclude any other geometry to be affected while working near another part of the mesh. You can use this method to other areas not to get affected, and smoothing out this area. Now we want to mirror it using a mirror modifier, applying it, and then go to tab to edit mode and P for selection and L to select the desired object and selected part to be separated. From that operator to create two different legs, and using the individual origins on the origin setting on the top, we're scaling them down at the same time and selecting them one by one, bringing them down and placing them on the edge of the leg where it should be placed on, with our desired look that we're going for. And doing same with the other leg. Now as the joining part is going to be under the cloth, I'm not joining it. What you can do is that you can select the leg part, press shift and select the foot and join them, bringing them closer, and then remesh them and then smooth out the line that is in between them. Now while retopologizing it, you can retopologize pretty much this area without any worries together, and doesn't have to be joined. Just make sure that the proportions are near and looks intact, and from a distance it doesn't look that a separate part of the foot had been placed into it, even with the cloth. And that's why it becomes handy. can go to tap to edit mode and side the cloth to only cover up that area that is joining in. Using the grab brush, I'm modifying the geometry a little bit more, because I think this area is going to get a bit more down and a bit more round shaped, and then getting back to the object mode and making sure this area looks not over the top of each other but intact with each other. Now, after creating the model completely, we're applying the cloth modifier of the subdivision after enabling to a higher subdivision level, and then using a remesh modifier to further bring the geometry subdivisions higher. Now we're sculpting the cloth details on it. You need to go a little bit less on strength in this part, otherwise the geometry could be dragged inside the model. And now you can see that how with the curvature of the cloth, we're creating a monk dress, like how a monk or a saint wears. Now, while I have presented the animation took quite a long time because it had 50 million polygons. You can see that creating even small forest patches or forest covers can take millions and millions of polygons. And that what I've discovered is it was actually on the start had gone to 50 million polygons, and I was like, this is not going to render. And then I figured out a way to decimate the geometry without losing any quality and bring down the geometry from 50 million to only 5 million. So that could be done with the geometry level, that you can actually bring the geometry at least 10 times down than what it shows completely together. That includes the grass, the trees, the staircase, the rocks that I've created, and all the other objects. The Chinese stone lamps that is in the front of the camera while the shot starts. That's when I've realized that even the shot sizes are quite big. It could be bring down 10 times. And on large scale scenarios, this could be really helpful to know that this could be done. Now, if you want to know that how I've done that, then you can ask me for a separate video, or I'd be talking about it on a separate video. How to bring your geometry down using the native tools of Blender, and it's really great to know that it exists and it could be done in a way that is cannot be just understood. But I don't know like how it is done internally by the software, but it just works like magic. And that's why this workflow becomes really important, and it becomes a really big part of learning, that creating high density forest covers or outdoor scenes while the polygon counts just rattles any machine. Like your machine has a definite amount of VRAM, right? And having a high geometry can cause your machine to use more VRAM and then suddenly crash it, even you have a 8 GB or 16 GB for large scale scenes. And in these large scale scenes, what happens is that you can optimize the geometry so your CPU has lesser load, and then it would be easier for your CPU and the GPU to handle things. So the optimization is the main thing in this particular animation that I've created, and it is the studios who has this optimization techniques really higher, because they actually render in millions, even though they use a lot of compositing techniques and layering systems in order to simplify the process, but still the millions of polygons had to be rendered. If you're not having a machine, that doesn't mean you cannot do it, because I doesn't have a preferable machine right now and I can do it. Like AMD A9 9400 CPU with the Radeon R5 graphics from 2016, and if I can do it, and you can do it too. And with a graphics card and with a good CPU like a AMD Ryzen or Intel's newer processors, it would be really easy to do it, but it can really get out of hand really quickly with forest scenes that accounts for more geometry, even in smaller scale scenes. And that's where this new technique shines, that I've understood that it could be done. What you need to just have to do is that to focus on the textures, maybe on the composition part. To make it beginner friendly, I've just focused a little less on the textures, because the whole point of this tutorial was to show you how to sculpt the model correctly, and the scene was to been built around that character. And then what made it different was that in 2024 I've tried to do a forest scene, and on the 44 million polygon it went to 70 million polygon, and then my machine crashed. Now the same machine, the same upgraded Blender level 4.2, 4.3, something like that, and the same machine now can render up to like 5 million polygons. Like, think about it. But it was actually not 5 million polygons, it was 50 million polygons. And I've found a way to, without reducing a lot of quality, to assert that it's just that I didn't have a good GPU, so I could render out a 4K version of it. Otherwise it would have like taken an year to do so. Even the 1080p resolution was too much to ask for my computer. So I've rendered out in a less standard format, but I think the animation looks well. And if it would have 4K, then it would have better quality. But well, it has actually been proven at least that higher levels of geometry could be rendered in low-end machines. So if you are using a low-end machine, if you're a beginner who doesn't have a high-quality machine, it doesn't have to worry that it doesn't have a high-quality machine. And if you have a high-quality machine, then congratulations, you might be able to surpass 50 million polygons, or maybe 100 million. Who knows, with the latest Vulkan updates, it could go even crazier than that with RTX cards. No, because I doesn't have an RTX or something like that currently, I know that what could now be possible with it. Because even low-end machine, if it could do this thing on high-end machine, it might be just blowing away all the softwares out there, because it doesn't have too much of higher overhead, really, because it can handle a lot of geometry and a lot of textures at the same time. But even with the geometry, I would like to say, it was not that my RAM had ran out with 4K textures. It was still been renderable using the CPU rendering and cycles. Eevee was crashing because it has a higher overhead with more higher quality textures. So if you're having like a 4K texture and it's not rendering, your CPU would be able to render it. In cycles, particularly in Eevee, it sometimes crashes. Maybe because I had a low-end system, but if you had a high-end system, that would not be the case. And if you had a good GPU and a good CPU, then it could be just blow off the charts. Like, you can just render the animations out in Eevee just in a minute. And when I saw the difference, the cycles and the Eevee part of the lighting didn't look much more different in my scenario. Now to your scenario, it could look a little bit different according to the objects you have, but it looks pretty similar. It's just what made the difference. It was that the cycles subsurface scattering on the grass looked much more different. Now, I haven't tested with the 5.0 branch, new official version of the Blender, but I think with the 5.0 version, they have said the Eevee and cycles looks the same, because previously on the 4.5 version, which was the previous one, the lighting looked different, the materials looked slightly different. Now I think they have surpassed that, and it looks much more similar to cycles results in the Eevee. So I think with the newer 5.0 version of the Blender, you would be able to get more accurate like cycles render, but you have to know some tweaks in the Eevee if you're rendering with it. Eevee comes with a significant quality that it can render your animations, which could take hours or days, into seconds if you have an RTX card. So keep that in mind, and you would be able to render your things out in less amount of time. Now, if you want to know which technique I've used, you can pin in the comment. You can write in the comment that you want to know about it, even though I will be making a video about it soon. So, after creating the cloth details, we're going to create the clothes flexibility looks, because the clothes should be a little bit of hanging. It should not be too much tight, and should look a little more generally be interacting with the body, so that the statue or the character that we're creating at here looks much more lifelike. creating a losing part of the cloth on the hands creates an emphasis that the cloth is interacting with the other body parts, and that makes it look much more natural. And doing same on the other hand as well, because both parts of the cloth should be hanging from same distance. And would be masking out the leg area using Shift A to mark out some area, and then use the mask tool to manually mask out using brush. So while we're trying to work on the top part of the cloth, the bottom areas of it doesn't get affected as it is part of the same geometry. So the masking actually helps to isolate this parts to be affected from the top parts. Now, one thing easily you can do is that you can lasso mask it and then can invert the mask and hide it. And now you can make this cloth folds type of geometry lines using the brush, and then smooth them out a little bit to not make them look too sharp. And doing the same on this side as well. Now you can work on this intuitively and look at what works for you and smooth them out here as well. And you so it naturally looks blending in, and doing same in this part and also in this part as well. And making some adjustments on this hand to make sure that it's not intersecting with the hand, shoulders, or any other part of the geometry. The arms are separated from the cloth and has a proper spacing, so it looks believable. we're going to mesh using pressing the Shift A, creating a new plane, and then pressing M in the edit mode to collapse the threads there, and then going to go to snapping mode and turn on the snapping from the top bar and make the snapping to faces, and then grabbing the new point that we have created, we're going to extrude it, and we're going to extrude it at some distance with an equal amount of spacing until the area of the ears and nearby. And we're making this inversely, like the first point and the second point would be at an intersection point to each other. The space of the first point and the second part of the geometry would have an intersection between the point and the space, and because these points would be replaced using the geometry nodes using some UV spheres. But this is the base geometry that they are going to be placed at, so for visualization it is created like this, and we're using a mirror modifier to mirror this on the other side as well. And by manually doing this, we know that where this geometry is going to be placed, because in some of the parts of the statues of Buddha there is his cap that I have saw in his head. So I'm creating this prop using the geometry nodes, but by manually first making the geometry base for it and then replacing the points with UV spheres later on. Now instead of the UV spheres, you can use as well icospheres with the low geometry if you want. With the level of subdivision that would look the same as well. Now I'm going to the Geometry Nodes tab and adding Instance on Points node, and then adding a UV sphere instance. Or a icosphere instance if you want. And setting it smooth so it just has a smooth shading effect. It doesn't look bad having lesser geometry, because there are going to be quite a lot of them, and this can cause quite a lot of geometry. Now there would be doubles of this because it's been mirrored and in the middle of it it's intersecting. Later on what you want to do is to just go in. After applying the modifier, it would be solidified as a geometry. Right now it's at a non-destructive modeling level. Then you just remove the doubles manually by clicking L and selecting the UV spheres that you see that they are double and intersecting in the middle line. And those middle parts of the head of this geometry, you would be just deleting them. This had to be done manually, and it's okay to do the manual work because the other parts would be just handled by the node systems. And yes, you can change this shape and the configuration of where the spheres, the icospheres or the UV spheres should be placed on would change accordingly. Until then, you'll be just creating these lines and extruding them. Now you can create patterns, but we're not going for something really modern with this. We're going for something really simple with this one. But this is a good way of doing it non-destructively, because after placing all the spheres by your hand, if you find that you want to change them, it would be a menace then. So just going in manually works good for this one. The only thing you just need to remember after doing this kind of work is that you remove any double geometry if that is there. There would be, because there is a mirror. I found that if it would have been aligned, every point of it, with each other, then it would have looked a bit off. That's why displacing it from one point to other space in parallel, from one wire to the other, in this way it looks much more natural. It looks like one bead to the other is just holding up to each other rather than tying up to each other. And that looks good, actually, what I found. That's why I'm doing it this way. Otherwise, those intersecting parts of the geometry, yeah, they would have still existing. What usually works for you, or what you make work with it. For different projects, it's different. And you might not want to rush in this part. It just took me like an hour to do this. And I didn't want it to rush, even though I wanted to. But it's okay to sometimes experiment. Unless you experiment quite a lot with things, you do not really know what things are like. And what things will come out of it. You just naturally submit yourself to the process and let the process happen. And that's what creativity is about. It's not about having 100 types of calculations and taking calculative measures. It just happens. And have a purpose to liberate yourself from the calculations of the mind, because the mind is made of these imaginations. And Buddha, at some point, you'll find in the sculpture, had been closing eyes. Do you know why? While sitting in the banyan tree, under the banyan tree, that he knows that he is under the nature. And he cannot be free of the nature or be founding in the nature what the nature means. But by looking himself at who he is, to what his relationship with the nature actually is. That's why he's closing the eyes, to know who I am in the first place, and therefore what my relation to everything that I see outside of me is. That's why one needs to turn off their vision in the process of creativity. First, to stop looking out first, and start to looking in. That what is the purpose of me doing this? Maybe me exploring myself is my first part, and maybe me sitting down with myself is my first duty. And to that I've created a quote that goes like, those who can sit with themselves will stand up for the others. And that was Buddha is about. Even he knew and understood himself and the mind of the man, that how it operates from generational old bondages. Even still, he sticked around and said that I'll liberate the one who wants to get liberated. He didn't say about everyone. He said specifically that I know that people are at down times at point of life, but those who want to liberate themselves, for them I would be here. So it talks about a specific sect of people. That a specific sect of people is everyone, actually. But one needs to accept that while one is down, there's a time to stand up. And to accept that is the first step to stand up, and then comes the action. So that first realization or acceptance happens within, that I'm at a place and I want to be at a more greater place than this. And then the greater place could not be anything beyond the soul. So the whole nature becomes a place of a medium. The whole nature becomes a medium to know yourself. The thing you think about was an obstacle. The nature becomes a medium to reach your own self, to see that how you relate to the other, in what context. And see, that's how we have made the cap. Now, what we want to do is that the non-destructive part, we want to copy it and place it on the same folder that we have created previously, where we have been keeping all the non-destructive parts of the model, and then applying this, creating a copy using Shift-D. And on the non-destructive model, we want to keep it. And on the destructive side of the model, we want to keep that as well. But what we'll be applying, that's what's going to be going with the geometry and settling down with this one. And after exporting, you need to make sure that the doubles are removed, because there is this sort of problem with this, that it mirrors with a bit of offset, and there is a duplication of the same geometry. Now, using the geometry nodes, you can actually somehow use the maths and the proximity of one geometry to the other geometry, and deleting the in-betweens if it's under a close proximity or intersecting with each other, and that could also be done. Now here I'm taking a UV sphere, deleting half of it and using it as a base model to create an instance, the same type of spheres on its points. And to do this, we would be using the same set of the geometry nodes that we have previously used. We're just copying this, and for the base geometry we would just be using the UV sphere, and then using a join geometry node, we'll be just joining them. But then this happens. And now you can see it is working. By doing this, we have successfully created the cap. I want to apply all the modifiers to make the destructive version of this cap. And deleting any double parts which are intersecting with each other. Looking manually in. Full body and painting it. Now the time is to paint the clothes. So we're going to go up and change the color to an orange. And with that we'll be painting using the paintbrush tool. Now you can see that some of the areas are masked. These masked areas can be turned out using Alt-M on the keyboard to clear them out. Otherwise, those areas which are masked out won't be able to have the paint. We're just using a real simple technique, just using a single color. Now you can use multiple colors, and after retopologizing the model and UV unwrapping it, you can bake the details into it. Now using the grab brush, I'm adjusting some of the areas of the cloth a bit more. And masking this area out, because when I pull the top part of the cloth area in the arms, this area is going to be affected. So that's why the mask brush comes a lot handy while using the modifications in the same model. Enclosed spaces. And I'm just hanging this area out a little bit more, so it gives a feel of simplicity. And the sense of peace. If I would have left the clothes in that way, then the clothes would have looked really strange. Because monk dresses or dress of the saints are a little bit used to be loose in those days. This was a good practice for sculpting the cloth, and this is the first time I'm creating a human cloth sculpt. And it is important with each of your project. It's not only you teach, you also learn some of the new techniques and new things. And as you do and discover them, it becomes really good over time. Now here I'm drawing some of the lines to make this area a little bit more scene and a little bit more in depth. This is how you can create some depth in the cloth. Now I know that the cloth brushes could be used, but I wanted to use the general sculpting brushes to do this, because long before the cloth brushes existed, other things did used to exist which were normal, and sometimes you just want to use not the simulation brushes but the normal ones. Adding some more things to it. And that's it. And now selecting the eyebrows, I'm going to change the color to black and paint them black using the paint tool. As you create things and all things assemble together and paint them, they start to look like one single piece. But while working on one part of your character, you handle it single-handedly from one focus, one thing at a time. And as you go to the refinement stage, you just keep refining each of the parts, and that refining process takes some time. The base and then the refining. The middle of it is just goes like a breeze. The refinement time would take you longer, because there are certain of decisions you have to make. Right now I've pressed Shift A, created a NURBS curve from the curve panel, and this NURBS object would be used as an eyebrow. Now bringing close to the eyelids, and what to do, you'll go to the curve panel at the side and go to object. It doesn't have to go to object, I have to just change the depth to add some geometry to it. And then on the end panel, you can on the end panel, in this section you can change the radius of each point in order to make it look like the eyelashes. This is how we're creating the eyelashes. Now, because we are just doing it the old-fashioned way, using some modeling techniques, and for the main character sculpting, we're using the sculpting. and then pairing it with the modeling techniques, of course. And that's where the both conjunct, the props, the smaller objects, which are easier to fine-tune in a non-destructive way with the modeling process, using modifiers or curves or something else, or geometry nodes. We can conjunct things between them. So if we want to change it, it doesn't have a dense geometry, which is really hard to configure. Rather, we have a simplified geometry, which is easier to configure. And if we want to come back and change some of these things, we can do so. Right now, I'm just Shift D and duplicating them and rotating them. In this case, I'm rotating it usually in the RY axis, because that is the front axis I'm working in. I would keep duplicating it and pushing it backwards sometimes, and then rotating it. And when this would be completed, we'll join them together and convert them in a mesh. Because right now they are all curve objects. Once they become mesh, then you can start painting on them and just make them eyebrows without any problems or issues. And then after selecting everything, we need to press Ctrl J. And having a separated folder just helps in this case quite a lot. And then you save the project. Now I can duplicate this object to another folder that we have created previously in the beginning part, which is hidden, where all the non-destructive parts are there, and we'll only be working on the destructive parts, which doesn't have any modifier or any kind of primitiveness, that has high poly count. That is the current basis of what we'll be working on, and all the non-destructive parts would remain as a copy to the other areas. And now I have painted the eyebrows using the black color. And just look at it, how it looks, and painting some of the black color in the cheeks, on the forehead areas, some on the nose with a lower strength, really slowly pressing to bring out some of the shadowy areas and add a bit more depth. Now you can just skip this part if it looks too dark. If it looks too dark, then you use the same color of the skin with a darker tone, not using a black one. But because Buddha used to live quite on the outside world and he used to spend a lot of time in meditation, when you are spending a lot of time in the meditation zone, then it would be not looking at how your face is looking. You might be sitting there for quite a long time, like for a day or maybe so. So some of the dirt is collected on the part of the crevices of the different areas of the face. And that's why it's been painted a bit more darker. Because to showcase that how deeply focused one can be at the self realization point, looking into the self, closing the eyes to know what have been missed out, sitting in the banyan tree and understanding life and his relation to the nature. And to that, becomes greater. And now we're painting in the crevices of the ears to make it look a bit more fantastic. To appear and it more, adding some shadowy areas. And after gridding all the parts of the body and painting them, it just looks and feels great. But right now we're joining them. I've selected both of the objects and pressed Ctrl J, and then we're remeshing with a bit less resolution. Means a little bit more subdivision levels to join them in high poly state. To keep the details and as well joining them, so it can merge the areas of the neck and area of the head. Now we would be joining one thing at a time, otherwise it would be really problematic to join all the big parts and remeshing them, which would take a long amount of time. So we would be doing one part at a time at this level. And with this technique, you would be able to join your whole character together. Now, if you doesn't want to join, you can escape this if it doesn't have to necessarily, because we would be remeshing it, however, but it's okay to join it at this point to know like how to remesh properly and join two different parts of the same character. Now we're joining the torso and the neck and the head together and remeshing them. So we can smooth out their intersecting area to make it look much more natural. Now you can see this line, this makes it look a bit more unnatural. And we'll be using the smooth brush to smooth out this line so it has a gradual fade in the body. Look just like a human body does have. If it doesn't want to, or if your necessity is not to do this, it doesn't have to. But it's good to know like how to do these things properly. Because if you wish to, or you have to, then you might want to know how to do things if you are at a beginner level, and this could help. And the belly and the lower waist area doesn't have to be joined necessarily, because it's not going to be seen in this. It's going to be probably be hidden inside the clothes, so it doesn't have to be joined. Only the top part of the area is mostly visible, and that had to be joined. So that's it. I hope you learned something new.